It is an honor to share this stage with three poets and women that I greatly admire. I admire their openness, their honesty, their authenticity. Megha Rao, Nishi Jain, Mehak Goyal. They write of our times and they write in the language of our times. To open this session, I would like to quote a couplet. Shairi hai, to ruh mein ranai hai. Because there's poetry, there's the beauty of soul. Shairi hai, to ruh mein ranai hai. Shairi hai, to tasavvur hai, masihai hai. Shairi hai, to hai rabte apne. Shairi hai, to mehfil hai, tanhai hai. Poetry is the world. Everything is in poetry. What is not in poetry does not exist. With these words, I would like to turn to these three brilliant poets. The way I was thinking of handling this session so that you get to hear from them and you get to hear their poetry, I thought we'd lead with some poems, but please feel free to read a poem or not, as you wish. Poets should have room and space to prepare themselves to recite, so I totally respect that. But if you would like to read from your poetry collection, Mehak, and then we go to Nishi, and then if you would like to read now or later, Megha, that's up to you. And otherwise, I'll ask you a question that I want to ask.
Hey guys, thank you so much for turning up here. I'm going to read a poem. It's called Remembering Childhood. It's one of the poems that's closest to my heart because it was the first poem of mine that ever got published around 3 years back. And just a trigger warning, it does have themes of sexual violence. Remembering Childhood. My father would nod at me only if I stood first in class. Now, I should be the first of my friends to become a Mrs. I used to wander the toy store for hours till I found my perfect Barbie. I used to wander the toy store for hours to find my perfect Barbie. But now, a Ken doll has been arranged for me. I should behave as he instructs. I worked until my eyes dried to be the lucky one at my job. But now we walk the 7 peras because the astrologer assured my new parents I would be auspicious. Even peeking at liquor was prohibited. Even peeking at liquor was prohibited. But now, on my wedding night, the wine bottle is thrust inside me. I should stain the sheets red. When I was 10, I asked, "What do you dream about, Ma?" She replied, "My child should be safe and happy. You are my everything." I had laughed then, but now her dainty palms touch my chest. I can't fail my daughter.
Those were very heartfelt words, Mehak. Do you want to recite, Nishi?
To be very honest, I am the most nervous person right now inside this room. So by admitting it, this is my act of surrender. People's disregard, a heart's silent please. Embarrassment's shadow cast upon me. In poetry's refuge, I'm finally free. No voice to defend, silence is my plea. Yet through words, my truth finds glee. Fear of hurting, a weight I bear. Speaking truths, a risk I dare. Forbidden love, a secret affair. In my poetry's realm, emotions I share. Restricted feelings held tight within. In verses embrace, they softly begin. A symphony of thoughts, a hidden spin, poetry's solace, where I've always been.
Thank you for that, Nishi. Megha, you'd recite, or should I ask a question?
I think this is like truth or dare. I'm going to go for the question.
Okay. So, I would like to take from the theme of the poem that Nishi just recited. What brought you to poetry? What was your path to it, or how did it come to you? Either ways. And I would be asking you the same question, so fair warning.
So for me, poetry was this safe space. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Is there anyone who can't hear me? Yes? Okay, great. For me, poetry was this safe space where I could be unhinged. I think earlier, Sachi sir, he spoke about being mad. And I think it takes a lot of vulnerability to just express. I think expression of your emotions can sometimes get misinterpreted. People can assume, okay, this person's being unhinged, this is not normal behavior. But poetry became this space where I could talk about things that probably made other people uncomfortable, but I didn't do it to make them uncomfortable. It was a source of comfort for me. And talking to younger poets, and not just poets, but as, anyone in my generation and from the Gen Z, and I just feel like that people want to talk about a lot of things, but they still feel like they're going to get judged for it. And I feel like all of art kind of gives you this space to just become who you are, whoever you want to be, and that's very beautiful.
That's a very thoughtful answer. And so you touched upon people wanting to say things, but they are afraid of being judged. Were you afraid of being judged? Were you afraid at all when you were, doing the poetry you were doing?
So I perform a lot of poetry as well, and it's really daunting to go up on stage and perform confessional poetry. But I think it's one of those situations where you just push yourself because it means so much to you. You sometimes want the truth out, and in that moment, you don't care if people pity you, you don't care if you're judged. I know so many people are terrified of being on a stage, and I'm one of those people. I'll be very honest. I think in the beginning when I was performing, I couldn't do it. I kept telling myself I couldn't do it. But it's also about flipping the narrative. What happens when you start telling yourself that you can do it? Say it today, say it tomorrow, say it every day. See the change, because that really worked for me, and I really believe it will work for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's the key, takeaway. It works for everyone so long as you're willing to give it a go, so long as we are willing to try. Nishi, what brought you to poetry? How did it happen for you?
So, since childhood, like in my family itself, I've been labeled a lot of things, always like ugly, petite. For the 17 years of my life, nobody told me that I'm beautiful. And
You're
now,
beautiful.
thank you so much for saying that. Nobody told me that. And I was just longing that someday somebody would call me beautiful. But, by the time when I looked myself in the mirror and I found myself beautiful, but I couldn't say it. And hence, poetry. So now I've started to believe that what I write is what I am. It gives me a sense of freedom. It is transcendental. Like, yeah, whatever is restricted to me in the real world, in poetry's realm, I do that. Whether or not I show it to the world, even if I keep it to me, but I know I'm being honest with myself. That is my mirror, the verses I write. Every time I go back to the lines I wrote, it just gives me clarity that, okay, this was the situation I was dealing with. This is how I was feeling. These are the details, how my day passed, how my hair were, how my head was swollen. So yeah, so that the mirror, I mean, poetry is that mirror. Sometimes it's a reflex action to express the depths of love, hurt, frustration, anger, shame, embarrassment, whatever you call it. So yeah, that is, to me, sometimes it's an immediate response.
What I hear is, it is a spontaneous response
Yes, yes.
to whatever exteriority is impinging upon you. Before I move to Mehak, Nishi, you are very beautiful.
Mehak, thank you so much.
Same question.
So I started writing poetry because I was in the lowest phase in my life. 3 years ago, I was a successful entrepreneur, and due to a freak injury, I was bedridden for around 6 months. This was the first time I started reading contemporary poets. Before that, I used to read William Wordsworth, Yeats, etc. But this is the first time I started reading contemporary Indian poets and started relating so much to it because I felt within those 5 minutes of reading a poem, my mood would go up. And I felt, this is a kind of, and I've been a voracious reader all my life, but this poetry kind of healed me as much as the medicines healed me at that time. I was in bed rest for 6 months. I had to close my startup till right at that time because I couldn't walk even 5 steps. I went through a very, very bad breakup around the same time. My personal life was in turmoil because of the breakup. My professional life was in turmoil because I had to close my startup. My health was in turmoil, something that I'd taken so for granted, right? Because I was working for the first 26 years of my life effortlessly. And I didn't know what to think, what to do, or who to turn to. And poetry was the medicine that actually healed me, and I started writing then. Thankfully, few of my poems started getting published in journals, and that's when I started feeling good about myself and not feeling more of a failure in life.
You definitely not at all a failure. We're very proud of the book, which we will be releasing at the end of the session, Mehak's collection of poetry. So one theme that all three of you have sort of resonated with, or at least to me it seems that connects you, is the fact that you write at the cusp of vulnerability and strength, translating one into other, the other back into the former, in this, in words expressing, what you are actually truly afraid to say, and doing it in poetry in a very public fashion. It really astonishes me. It also impresses me. So would you like to talk about your style of poetry a bit? Maybe we can start with you, Megha.
I was listening to this podcast, Oprah's podcast. It's called Super Soul. She had interviewed Brené Brown, who talks about vulnerability. And when I listened to that, I realized that all this while, we keep thinking that it's weak to cry. And I think deep down everyone knows, okay, it's not weak, I can cry. But we don't realize how difficult vulnerability is. It's difficult because when we're getting vulnerable in front of someone, we don't know what the outcome is. They could judge us, they could pity us, they could even experience catharsis. Okay, thank God I'm not in this position, right? So vulnerability is very complex. It's very difficult. And that's exactly why I think it's very brave as well. If I see someone opening up about something in their life in front of me, I think that takes great courage. So with my writing as well, that was the one thing I held on to. That was my ideology. I told myself, Megha, when you go up there on that stage and perform a poem which is deeply confessional, even if you cry, even if you shout, you get angry, it's okay. I think that's very brave. That's what I told myself. There could be someone in the audience who might think, oh, what is she saying? She's screaming, she's crying, what is this? It's insane, it's ridiculous, but that doesn't change anything for me because I'm speaking my truth. And poetry has always been my truth. It's always been my best friend. It's always been this place that looked back at me and said, you can come here and be your most authentic self. And that's completely fine. So poetry for me has also, my style, I would say, is very flexible in the sense that I don't believe I really follow any form. I know when I started writing poetry years ago, it was free verse. I know I didn't use a lot of full stops. It was like a train running. Some of the sentence would end somewhere in the next line, and it was like a rant sometimes. But then I go back to this poem by Noor Hindi. I don't know if I can swear, but that's the title of the poem. It's called Fuck Your Lecture on Craft, My People Are Dying. She's a Palestinian poet. She talks about how, she talks about how we are so caught up with structure and rhythm and rhyme, with poetry defining what it is. But the core of poetry is emotions. It's about talking about how you feel, about protesting against every injustice that happened against you, and just being yourself instead of trying to make it rhyme. I mean, you can if you want to, but that shouldn't be the priority when you're creating poetry or any art.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's in Hindi poetry, there was a movement when poetry in free verse became more mainstream, and I keep remembering the lines that Sumitra Pant wrote. He wrote, "Khul gaye chand ke band, pras ke rajat pash." The meters, bonds were broken, and the alliterations, silver cuffs were shattered. So poetry is beauty in language. It's linguistic beauty. We all love language. That's why we
I
like
love the
poetry.
metaphor of the silver cuff.
Yeah,
Just
isn't that
honestly.
lovely? Isn't it lovely? So beyond the beauty, what lies beyond the beauty is probably poetry, right? It transcends beauty, it transcends ugliness, it transcends judgment. It gives you the freedom. I really, I totally see and experience what you were saying. It was like you were performing a poem. It felt like that.
Thank you so much.
Nishi, would you like to? Or would you like to recite?
Yes, that's what I was going to do before I speak anything about this whole question. So sometimes you don't want to be vulnerable, but you are forced to. So this is in context, I mean, there was a phase, like when I was insomniac, I couldn't sleep for so many nights, I used to cry. And I wouldn't know when I would drift while crying. So, and then the morning happens. I didn't know whether I would wake up or not, but it happens, and I'm forced to open my eyes. And when I can't move my body, I just take my phone and I write something. So that is how I'm forced to be vulnerable, forced to express, because I'm left with no choice. And when that time, when you write, you wouldn't think of syntax, structure, or any form of poetry, whatever your head, line by line creating, you were just writing that. So this is how I wrote. I mean, sometimes it's not the poetry we sell, sometimes it's the stories we tell, I guess. So yeah, I'll just recite the piece I've written. It's a simple one. Oh damn you alarm, oh damn you alarm, don't start again. I don't want to be reminded of another new day. The day doesn't have any newness anyway. And I don't want to create one either. I'm still waking up with a yesterday in my head. I'm bored of feeling what I have been feeling for days now. The tears don't stop and the muscles in my head feel swollen. I can't see what lies in the present. The torture of the past few days has worn off my body. I can't move. I'll go back to sleep again. At least the emotions will be separated from this body. And I'd appreciate God if I don't get to wake up the next day. Morning thoughts.
Gosh.
So that is why I believe that we shouldn't be defining or confining poetry into one type. This, if anything, I mean, any piece of work which is making you feel something, that is poetry.
That's an interesting definition of poetry, that it's an experience in language.
Yes.
Mehak, your poetry is also, as you just mentioned, came from a very difficult phase of your life. So, and your style, I guess, is also confessional. How do you approach your poetry, the writing of it? Do you think of the craft, or how do you edit? How do you refine your poems?
So for me, the biggest, the reason that I started writing poetry was that there was a volcano of emotions inside me, and I wanted to pour that out on paper. And I think for all my life, right, women, girls, us as girls and women are, told to behave in a certain way, sit in a certain way, talk in a certain way, even smile in a certain way, right? And for too long, I have listened to all of that. For too long, I tried to be the good girl. For too long, I said, let's try to be the person that they want me to be. It could be the society, it could be the char log that you're, in contact with on a day-to-day basis. For me, poetry came from a place of the experiences that I had been on, how we as young women are taught, you need to make round rotis. Uske baad, when you go to your sasural, what is your husband going to eat if you can't make round rotis?
Do you want to read that poem, that eponymous poem?
One second. So I'll read some lines from this poem. The title is How to Make Round Rotis. Take 2 cups of unbound flour in a mixing bowl. Add 3/4 cup of water of discontentment. Knead with knuckles of fragile hands. Reiterate, the dough should be soft, smooth, and pliable. Touch floured hand to forehead, make it white. Remove a dream from the dough. Roll on hands until it is confined to a circle. Place on the rolling board and crush lightly. Use ingrained displeasure and rage to flatten it with a rolling pin. Toss the roti on the virtuous tawa. Round and puffed, serve it for a worthy fortune. So I feel that for the longest time, we have been told that, the abilities to cook for your in-laws or even your husband will get you a worthy fortune, which is what I want to fight for. And I wanted to write about issues that have ignored me for a long time, but which I did not maybe have a stage or even a authority to speak about. But then this happened, so I couldn't ask for a better blessing.
So poetry empowered you.
Poetry empowerment, yes.
So with that, Megha, I would request you now to recite for us. Because poetry empowers the reader, the poet, the reader, the listener. It empowers the world when your words go out.
Right. Okay. So, is my book, Teething. Came out with it like 2 years back. Oh, no, no, it's fine. Was that from this mic? Okay. Okay, so this one is about bullying. It's about this kid who comes home and she's very sad that someone picked on her, and it's a conversation between her and her grandmother. They laughed at my braces. When my sister comes home crying after being bullied at school, our grandmother sits us down and makes us both some elaichi chai. What is it now? She asks gently. They laughed at my braces, she said. Do you know what they're made of? Steel. The stuff Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, is made of, she says, wiping her tears. And then she says, they made fun of my spectacles. Did you know that glass was made by heating sand? Now, everywhere you go, you carry a bit of the beach with you. They pick on me because I'm small, she says. So was the universe when it started out. They said I'll never get anywhere. Her voice is shaking now. Our grandmother smiles knowingly. That is exactly what the shelf told the book too.
That was very moving. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced bullying and have experienced also, or have had the good fortune, hopefully, of having an older, mature, positive relative to put things in perspective for us. But I love that line about, it's made of steel and same material which sustains and holds up huge structures. And maybe you're made of steel too. A bit of us is made of steel that holds us up and stops us from sagging or falling apart in the face of hardships. So that was very beautiful. Now I want to ask a question that ties into the title of this session. All three of you have significant social media presence. You have carved a space for poetry, for the spoken word, for performance poetry, for just words that express and resonate with a vast number of people. You write, you are contemporaries, same generation. You express and represent in many ways the voice of your times. It's a difficult thing to speak the language of your time while in your times, because it's usually there is a pushback by the establishment. Anything that is very contemporary finds, the establishment or established literary criticism, the canons find it difficult to handle it. It might get recognized later on, but initially there is a pushback. That always happens. So I would like to know from each of you, how do you react to this? How do you place your poetry in context of, say, contemporary poetry? Where do you see your poetry standing? Do you think that the fact that you have such a large audience, your poetry gets thousands of likes, you've got fans and admirers who wait for your work. Is that a strength, or is that also casting you, in a mold that you do not want to be cast? I would like you to speak about social media and poetry.
Okay. What I love about social media is that you have direct access to an audience when, especially when you probably don't come from a publishing background, you're not very sure how to go about putting a book out. I think for me, this was a very beautiful space to connect with people, share my art, but I also see it as a stepping stone. It's not like, okay, I'm writing on social media and there are people reading it. I want to do this once in a while, but at the same time, what else can I do? So I write on social media, I perform poetry, and that goes up on YouTube, and I have a podcast out that's on Spotify. And somehow I find myself in all these digital spaces while also being in an offline, on-ground space, which is, let's say, the stage or just existing in real time. Um, and I think they're both really beautiful. It's helped me so much because even today, when I meet people who discover me through these various platforms, I'm so grateful about that. And we live in a time where, you know, I mean, AI is taking over. So I'm not very surprised if people are putting their art out on social media. That's very common. As far as being put in a box is concerned, I think that I don't believe that there's nothing I can do about it. I'm not saying that, okay, you know what, I'm put in a box, I'm this poet on the internet because I'm, on YouTube, Spotify, but that is not going to limit me. Like they say, to define is to limit, and I don't want that. I don't want any tags. I don't want to be called a spoken word poet. I don't want to be called, sometimes I even ask myself, do I want to be called a poet at all? Because what if I write a novel tomorrow? I love trying new things, but I don't like being confined to a space. I think that's the beauty of art. That it can be anything. A poem, I get an idea, it could even be a painting, right? You can turn it into anything because it is limitless, it's boundless. So I think that's where I see myself. I wouldn't want any of these limitations because they are ultimately shackles. As much as they will help you, I think they can only help you to a certain level. And then you need to, it's something, I think Margaret Atwood said that you can't put yourself on a pedestal because there's not a lot of space to move around. This is similar to that. Being limited, again, there's not a lot of space to move around.
Just just to add to what Megha said, I completely agree with each and every sentence of her, and we've had a discussion for hours about this at end. But also, I feel that we are privileged enough and to have that kind of access and relate to such a large audience that we've built with a lot of care and trust by sharing things which are, again, coming back to the point of vulnerability, which sparks strength in the youth today, right? That is where we come in, and I've written a few breakup poems. My title of the book is Failure to Make Round Rotis. So a lot of women, there's no age barrier here. There are people who would be my mom's age. There are people who would be a lot younger than I am today. They come up to me and tell me, Mehak, I'm so happy that you've written this because I never thought that, for the longest time in my life, I was confined to a circle, which was the roti I made at home. And I don't want to be that anymore. So the more you reach out to people, the more you give them access to yourself, your work, I feel they also respond in the same way to you.
I've been given the signal for time. So I'm going to ask the next question, which I'm sure a lot of people want to know. All three of you have poetry collections out. People say poetry does not sell, or publishers don't want to publish it. This is not a, poetry is for free. Give it away. You received it in a moment of divine inspiration, pass it on. So how was your publishing journey? It would be very interesting to know and also to share with the audience here. Can we begin with you, Megha?
Okay, my publishing journey started with a lot of cold emails. I sent emails to people who had no idea who I was, so either I was bothering them a lot, or they were like, okay, this kid, I'm just going to delete her email. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Some people opened my email, they liked what I wrote, and they said yes. But it's a long process. It definitely is a long process, publishing, especially when you're publishing poetry, because poetry has had a comeback. You know what I mean? I think, I don't know, it was Plato who said poets are very useless in society. You don't need poets. That's not a profession. Take it out. But poetry has had a comeback, and social media helped that comeback. And so for me, I've had a very volatile publishing journey, but at the same time, it's all it takes is just one person to believe in your work and you somehow see yourself going somewhere. For me, while yes, I had a lot of people in the industry believing in my work, and that's why this was possible. I think the real people, I mean, the people who believed in my work and truly made it happen were the people who read my work. I feel like, you know, I think I can recognize some faces, people who spoke to me before this event, like before us sitting here. And they come up to me, they talk to me, and they've read my work. They are the ones who made it happen. And they're always going to be the ones who made it happen. And I'm always going to look at it like that. Nobody can change my mind about it. It's the people who make it happen.
Very interesting. Nishi?
So when I approached a few publishers, I mean, I had my manuscript ready and I did send them, I sent them a mail about telling them that, I have written a non-fiction self-help poetry book and I want to release it. The immediate response from them was, poetry doesn't sell. Nobody picks up poetry books. And especially if it's in English, because a lot of Hindi particularly in poetry, people prefer Hindi, regional stuff, I guess. That's my guess, I don't know. But yeah, so they told me if you can mold your book into prose and add more lines to it and just make it heavy, then we might take it. So, and that's why, and that's when social media happened to me. I went social media for my rescue. It anyway was my outlet. So I just made up my mind that I'm gonna build a following. I'm gonna tell them that these are the people, this is my community, they read my work, they resonate, because poetry's essence is resonance, right? Regardless of what you write. Whatever your structure is, whatever your type is. It is resonating with my followers. It is, people are coming up and DMing me and saying me that, I'm glad this post of yours reached me. This is what I was going through. So gradually, I built that following, and then I sent it to the publishers that, see, these are the people who love my poetry, who read my poetry, and if I come up with a book, I'm sure they will buy it. And that's how I got a deal, and Penguin published my book.
Very interesting. We have, HarperCollins, Penguin, and Jagavat. So they have published poetry. They have published. So all the aspiring poets, please note.
Despite of everything.
Yeah, send those cold emails.
Yes.
Don't hesitate.
I remember sending out at least 300 cold emails to various people at HarperCollins, Penguin, all the literary agents I could find online. And it was honestly one rejection after the other. Most of the people didn't even reply back. I was lucky enough to hear back from these two magnificent publishing houses as well, but they said, we publish so less poetry as compared to a fiction or a non-fiction because of the same reason that poetry doesn't sell. And I feel that somewhere we need to take the responsibility for, making it successful going forward. But I come as a startup. I treat my book as a startup since I've been an entrepreneur almost for about 7-8 years now. And to everyone out there who wants to write, who is writing right now, whether it be poetry, non-fiction or fiction, please do not stop hustling. Please do not stop believing in your work. All you need is just that one acceptance. And the story of my acceptance is actually, I was in talks with Harper and Penguin as well. And then the CEO of Jagavat called me up and she said, you know, I really like the poems that you've written. And she said, let's do this. This was a conversation I had with her in June of this year. And my book is out in July this year. And within a few weeks, it is a #1 bestseller on Amazon as well. So just the kind of love, support that the book has received is enormous, and my heart is full right now.
Congratulations on this achievement. I think we are out of time. Before we close the session, we would like to release the poetry collection of Mehak's. It's called Failure to Make Round Rotis. I invite Nishi and Megha to please launch the book and offer it to all of you.
Couldn't have asked for a better set of women. Thank you guys so much. Means the world.
Thank you very much, Bangalore Poetry Festival. Thank you for this fantastic audience who heard us. If there are any questions, do we have a couple of minutes for questions? Or you can find two questions? Okay. If there are any questions for Mehak, Nishi, or Megha, this is your chance. There's a question there, I see.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Vaishnavi. My question is for Megha Rao. I did read Teething. The boxes did so much damage to me and I can never walk out of it. But then I went back, heard Soulmates Everywhere, and I think I'm over the world. I'm the healthiest person with the mental health. How do you do that with words? It's magical. Like, how do you do that?
She's a magician.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. And it takes guts to actually stand in a crowd and ask questions. I wanted to ask questions to other people who were sitting here, but I was very scared of that. Like I said, and this is something I read somewhere, all it takes is 5 seconds of courage. You write something, and then putting it out there is your choice. You don't have to, but I think for me, throughout my career as a writer, and forget career, even when I didn't have a career as a writer, it was very important to me to be honest about my experiences without shaming myself, without shaming other people, to just talk about it without any judgment. And I think in the boxes, as well as, the podcast, while the podcast is a bit more, it's not as dark as the book. The podcast is, I would say, more positive. There was a time when I even thought, okay, this is manic pixie dream girl bullshit. But then again, like there's something nice about it. I do like it. Yeah, I don't think it's about magic. I think it's just about being very, very honest, and it's okay if when you put that down on paper, it looks ugly, because it has looked ugly many times, but just do it. It's not about not caring about what people think. It's more about caring about your work so much that you don't care about what people think. That's what I do.
Yeah. Hello. I'm going to address Megha here. I was very fortunate. 2 years ago, I did an online workshop with you, Megha. It was one of the best things that happened to me because, like Mehak, I went through a phase of being bedridden for 2 years, and it was a phase where I couldn't concentrate on anything. So when I did this workshop with you, I found myself feeling and thinking. And over the weekends, I think it was a 6-month course over the weekends. And through the week, you gave us poetry prompts. So every day, I would put on my thinking cap, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. And I continued writing, and one of these days, I'm going to struggle like you girls did to find a publisher. Okay? One of the lovely poetry prompts that you had given us was baking happiness. I wonder if you recall that. And yeah, my whole Christmas cake recipe's in it. Thank you.
I'm so honored to hear that, and I'm so proud of you for what you went through, and you've survived that, and you're thriving, and that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I know that was not a question, but I felt so happy to hear that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. Thank you, Megha, Nishi, and Mehak. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Anukrti, for being great.